The rain did not fall in Blackwood Forest. It shattered against the earth. It was a cold, relentless downpour that turned the trails into rivers of mud and drowned out every sound in the valley. But it could not drown out the scent. Titan, a 5-year-old Belgian Malinois with a coat the color of burnt mahogany, stopped dead in his tracks. His ears, usually swiveling like radar dishes, locked onto a single point in the dense gray mist. "Easy, Titan," Elias Thorne grumbled, pulling up the collar of his oilskin jacket. Elias was a man carved from granite and regret. At 52, he had left the chaotic world of law enforcement behind for the silence of these woods. He wanted peace. He wanted to forget the cases he couldn't solve. But Titan, his retired police canine, had never really learned how to retire. The dog lived for the hunt. And right now, Titan was hunting. The dog did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply vibrated, a low, guttural hum building in his chest that traveled up the leash and into Elias's hand. It was a specific signal, one Elias hadn't felt in 3 years. It was the signal for distress. "What is it, boy?" Elias whispered, his voice barely audible over the drumming rain. "Deer? Bear?" Titan turned his head slowly, his amber eyes piercing through Elias with an intensity that made the man's skin prickle. Then, the dog looked back toward the ridgeline, where the old logging road dissolved into a tangle of thorns and sheer rock faces. Titan took a step, then another. He wasn't asking for permission. He was giving an order. Elias sighed, unclipped the safety strap on his holster beneath his coat, and followed. "Lead on." They moved off the trail, plunging into the deep brush. The terrain was brutal. Slick roots tried to trip them, and low-hanging branches whipped at their faces. But Titan moved like a phantom, low to the ground, weaving through the obstacles with a singular, terrifying focus. Usually, Titan tracked ground disturbance. Today, he was tracking something carried on the wind, a scent of fear so pungent it cut through the smell of wet pine and decay. After 20 minutes of hard climbing, they reached a jagged outcropping of limestone. The wind howled here, tearing through the gaps in the rocks. Titan stopped at the base of a massive fallen oak tree. The trunk was hollowed out by rot and time, creating a dark, narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a coyote. The dog lay down instantly. He whined, a high-pitched, desperate sound that cracked Elias's heart wide open. Titan began to crawl forward on his belly, inching into the darkness of the log, ignoring the mud soaking his fur. "Titan, wait," Elias commanded softly. He crouched down, clicking on his tactical flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom inside the hollow trunk. At first, Elias saw only dry leaves and spider webs. But then Titan nuzzled something deep in the shadows. A small shoe. Blue canvas, caked in mud. Elias's breath hitched. He shimmied closer, angling the light. Curled into a tight, trembling ball at the far end of the log was a child. A boy, no older than 7. He was soaked to the bone, his lips a terrifying shade of violet. He didn't move when the light hit him. He didn't blink. He was staring at Titan with wide, glassy eyes, frozen in a state of shock so deep it looked like death. "Hey there," Elias said, his voice dropping to the gentle rumble he used to calm victims. "You're okay. I'm Elias. This is Titan." The boy didn't respond. He clutched a dirty backpack to his chest, as if it contained the only oxygen left in the world. Titan, sensing the boy's fragility, didn't crowd him. Instead, The formidable Malinois, a dog trained to take down armed felons, rested his chin gently on the boy's freezing ankle. He exhaled a long, warm breath over the child's leg. The boy blinked. A single tear tracked through the dirt on his cheek. "I'm going to pull you out, okay?" Elias said, reaching in. But as Elias shifted, the beam of his flashlight caught something else. Not on the boy, but on the wood of the log just inches above the child's head. It was a fresh gouge in the wood, a splintered hole. Elias froze. He knew that shape. He had seen it 1,000 times in his old life. It was a bullet hole. This child hadn't just gotten lost. He was hiding. And whoever had fired that shot was likely still out there in the storm, looking for him. Elias's instincts, dormant for years, roared back to life. He wasn't a hermit anymore. He was a protector. "Titan," Elias whispered, the command sharp and clear. "Watch." Titan's posture shifted instantly. The gentle comforter vanished. The soldier returned. The dog backed out of the log, turned to face the dark forest, and bared his teeth in a silent, deadly snarl. They were not alone in these woods. Elias worked quickly. He shrugged off his heavy oilskin coat and wrapped it around the trembling child, engulfing the small frame in warmth and the scent of wood smoke. "I've got you," Elias murmured, lifting the boy into his arms. The child was impossibly light, like a bird made of hollow bones. "Titan, heal." Titan did not heal, not immediately. The Malinois stood rigid at the edge of the clearing, his body acting as a living barrier between the boy and the dark forest. His nose twitched, dissecting the storm. Rain usually washed away scents, but it also trapped them close to the ground. Titan smelled something distinct. Gun oil. Synthetic fabric. The bitter sweat of men moving with purpose. A low, vibrating growl rumbled in Titan's throat, deep enough to be felt in the soles of Elias's boots. "Targets?" Elias asked, his voice stripping away all softness. Titan chuffed once a short, sharp exhale. "Yes." Elias cursed under his breath. He scanned the tree line. The visibility was less than 50 feet. Whoever was out there was close, and they were hunting the boy. "We move," Elias whispered, quietly. He didn't head back toward the main trail. That was a kill zone. Instead, Elias turned uphill toward the jagged spine of the ridge known as Devil's Staircase. It was treacherous, steep, and riddled with loose shale. But it was the only place a man with a gun couldn't walk easily. They climbed in silence. The mud sucked at Elias's boots, making every step a battle. The boy, whose name Elias learned was Leo, buried his face in Elias's shoulder, his small hands clutching the fabric of the man's flannel shirt. Titan took point. The dog moved differently now. He wasn't tracking. He was clearing a path. He would trot 5 yards ahead, stop, listen, and then look back at Elias with amber eyes that caught the faint gray light. Clear. Move up. For 30 minutes, they ghosted through the woods. The rain began to ease, replacing the deafening roar of the downpour with the terrifying quiet of a dripping forest. Suddenly, Titan froze. He didn't crouch. He didn't growl. He simply turned to stone, one paw lifted, his gaze locked on a thicket of rhododendrons 50 yards to their left. Elias stopped instantly. He knew that look. That was the proximity alert. He pressed his back against the rough bark of a hemlock tree, shielding Leo with his body. He placed a hand over the boy's ear, signaling him to be silent. Leo squeezed his eyes shut. Seconds later, voices drifted through the mist. Saw tracks near the creek. A man's voice rasped. It was calm, professional, not a frantic searcher, a hunter. Kid can't have gone far, a second voice answered. Not in this cold. If he freezes to death, it saves us a bullet. Elias felt a surge of cold rage in his gut, but he tamped it down. He looked at Titan. The dog had lowered his body into the wet ferns, becoming invisible. Only his eyes moved, tracking the invisible men. Titan wasn't afraid. He was calculating. He was measuring the distance, the threat level, waiting for the command to strike. But Elias couldn't risk it. Not with the boy. He signaled Titan with a subtle hand motion. Down. Stay. The voices drew closer. The snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot in the quiet air. They were parallel to Elias's position now. If they looked up the slope, if they saw the flash of the dog's tan fur, Titan didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He understood the stakes better than any human. He remained a statue of discipline, suppressing every instinct to attack, channeling all his energy into stillness. The footsteps crunched on the gravel below, paused, and then continued east, moving away from them. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked down at Leo. The boy was shaking violently, his teeth beginning to chatter. Hypothermia was setting in fast. They needed shelter, and they needed heat, or the men wouldn't need to find them. Titan, Elias whispered. The dog rose silently and trotted back to them. He nudged Leo's dangling hand with a wet nose, checking the boy's temperature. We need to get to the fire tower, Elias told the dog. Go. They pushed harder now. The incline grew steeper. Elias's legs burned, his lungs heaving with the effort of carrying the child. But Titan was relentless. Whenever Elias slowed, the dog would circle back, nudging his leg, pulling at his pants cuff, urging him forward. Do not stop. Do not quit. They reached the summit as the sun began to set behind the storm clouds, casting the world in a bruised purple light. The old fire lookout tower stood on stilted legs, a rusted steel box in the sky. Elias climbed the swaying metal stairs, his boots clanging softly. He kicked the trapdoor open and hauled them inside. It was dusty and smelled of dead flies, but it was dry. Elias set Leo down on an old mattress in the corner. He stripped the wet coat off the boy and wrapped him in a dusty wool blanket he kept in the emergency locker. Leo, Elias said, rubbing the boy's arms vigorously to generate heat. Look at me. You're safe. The boy's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Elias, then passed him to Titan, who had positioned himself at the trap door, guarding the only entrance. They killed my dad, Leo whispered, his voice a fractured rasp. Elias stopped rubbing. The silence in the tower became heavy, suffocating. Who did, Leo? The men with the stars, Leo said, trembling. On their chests. The bad policemen. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. Bad policemen? Leo nodded weakly and pointed to his backpack. Daddy gave me the phone. He said, run. Don't stop running. Elias reached for the muddy backpack. He opened the main zipper. Inside, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag, was a smartphone with a cracked screen. Elias hit the power button. The battery was in the red 4%. Just enough. A video file was open on the screen. Elias pressed play. The video was shaky, filmed from inside a car. It showed a meeting in a warehouse. Grainy, but clear enough. Elias recognized the face of the man handing over a thick envelope of cash. It was Sheriff Miller, the man who had replaced Elias, the man currently leading the search party. Elias stared at the screen as the screen went black. The battery died. He looked at Leo, then at Titan. They weren't being hunted by criminals. They were being hunted by the law itself, and in this county, that meant there was no one to call. No backup coming. Titan let out a low, warning bark. He stood up and paced to the windows that lined the tower, looking down into the darkening valley. Below them, a mile away but closing fast, 3 sets of headlights cut through the forest darkness. They weren't moving aimlessly. They were heading straight for the access road that led to the tower. "They know," Elias said, checking the load in his pistol. He had 7 rounds. He looked at the boy, then at the dog. "Titan," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to have to do something crazy." Titan looked back, his tail giving a single, slow wag. He was ready for crazy. He was born for it. The headlights swept across the tower's glass windows, blinding them for a split second. Then darkness returned, heavier than before. "Get down," Elias hissed. He grabbed Leo and shoved him under the heavy steel desk in the center of the room. "Stay here. Cover your ears. Do not make a sound no matter what you hear." Leo nodded, his eyes wide saucers of terror, clutching the dead phone against his chest. Elias moved to the trapdoor. He could hear the engines idling below. Doors slammed. Heavy boots hit the gravel. "He's up there!" a voice shouted. It was Sheriff Miller. "I can see the heat signature on the glass. 2 bodies, 1 small." "Burn it?" another voice asked. "No, we need the phone. Go up, drag them down." Elias looked at Titan. The dog was vibrating with potential energy. His muscles coiled like steel cables under his dark fur. Elias knelt and grabbed Titan's harness, pulling him close. "Silent," Elias whispered, tapping 2 fingers against his own lips. "Silent." Titan understood. Stealth mode. No barking. No growling. Just action. Elias cracked the trapdoor open just an inch. The metal stairs began to clang. 1 step. 2 steps. Someone was coming up. Elias waited. He counted the vibrations in the floor. Clang. 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 When the footsteps reached the landing just below the trapdoor, Elias didn't shoot. Instead, he kicked the door open with all his strength. The heavy steel door swung down, slamming into the climbing deputy with a sickening thud. The man shouted, losing his balance, but he managed to grab the railing. "Titan, fast!" "Bite!" The command was a whisper, but Titan launched himself like a missile. The dog flew through the open trapdoor, a blur of shadow and teeth. He didn't go for the throat. He went for the weapon arm. His jaws clamped onto the deputy's forearm, the pressure immense. The man screamed, dropping his rifle, and stumbled backward down the stairs. Titan released instantly on Impacta, bite and retreat tactic, and scrambled back up into the tower before the man even hit the ground below. Gunfire erupted from the ground. Bullets pinged off the steel underside of the tower, sparking like fireworks. "Now!" Elias yelled. He grabbed a heavy emergency flare gun from the wall locker standard issue for fire lookouts. He didn't aim at the men. He aimed at the dry brush pile directly behind the sheriff's parked trucks. Pop! Hiss! A brilliant red magnesium flare arced through the night and landed in the dead pine needles. Whoosh! The fire caught instantly, helped by the wind. "Fire!" Miller screamed. "Move the trucks! Move them!" Panic ensued below. The deputies scrambled to save their vehicles from the sudden blaze. "Let's go," Elias told Leo. He scooped the boy up. "Titan, guard." They descended the stairs in the chaos. Smoke was already drifting across the clearing, stinging their eyes. Titan ran ahead, clearing the landings. At the bottom, a deputy was trying to back up a patrol SUV. Elias didn't hesitate. He ran toward the vehicle. The deputy saw him and reached for his sidearm, but he was too slow. Titan didn't wait for a command. He leaped through the open driver's side window. The deputy shrieked as 90 pounds of Belgian Malinois pinned him against the seat. Elias yanked the door open, pulled the terrified deputy out, and threw him to the gravel. "Stay down!" Elias jumped into the driver's seat. "Leo, back! Titan, load up!" Titan scrambled over the center console into the passenger seat, barking furiously now, his job of stealth finished. Leo dove into the back. Elias slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the gas. The tires spun, spraying gravel at the sheriff, who was standing there, aiming his pistol. A bullet shattered the rear windshield, spraying safety glass over the back seat. "Get down, Leo!" Elias roared. They fishtailed onto the access road, narrowly missing a tree, and sped into the darkness. Elias drove with white-knuckled intensity. He checked the rearview mirror. No headlights yet. The fire had bought them time. But then, the radio on the dashboard crackled to life. "All units," Miller's voice came through, distorted by rage. "Suspect has stolen Unit 4. He is armed and dangerous. He has kidnapped the child. Shoot to kill. I repeat, shoot to kill." Elias stared at the radio. He wasn't just a fugitive now. He was a kidnapper in the eyes of every cop in the state. He looked over at Titan. The dog was sitting tall in the passenger seat, blood on his muzzle not his own. He looked at Elias, panting softly, his eyes calm. Titan wasn't worried about the radio. He wasn't worried about the law. He had his pack. "We can't go to the highway," Elias said to the dog, as if Titan could advise him. "They'll have roadblocks up in 10 minutes. He looked at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. "Leo," Elias called out, his eyes on the winding dirt road. "Is the phone charging?" I found a cord." Leo's small voice came from the floorboard. He had plugged the dead phone into the cruiser's USB port. "It says 1%. "Good. Keep it plugged in. That phone is the only thing that keeps us from dying tonight." Elias swung the wheel hard to the left, crashing through a wooden gate and onto an old logging trail that didn't appear on most maps. It was a risk. The trail led to the old iron bridge, a structure that had been condemned 20 years ago. If the bridge held, they could cross the river into the next county, out of Miller's jurisdiction. If it didn't hold, well, the river was swollen from the rain. "Hold on," Elias muttered. Suddenly Titan stood up on the seat, growling at the windshield. His hackles rose in a rigid line down his spine. Elias squinted. Through the trees ahead, blue lights flashed silently. A roadblock. "How?" Elias slammed the steering wheel. "How did they get ahead of us?" Then he realized. They weren't ahead. They were waiting. Miller had called in favors from the neighboring county. They were boxed in. Elias slammed on the brakes. The cruiser skidded to a halt in the mud. "Out," Elias commanded. "We walk." He grabbed his pack and the rifle from the rack between the seats. Leo scrambled out, clutching the charging phone. "Titan," Elias said, kneeling in the mud rain. "We have to cross the river, swimming." Titan looked at the rushing black water visible through the trees. The current was violent, churning with debris. "Can you do it, boy?" Titan looked at the water, then at Leo. The dog stepped forward and licked Leo's face once. He was ready. The river was a black vein pulsing with ice and fury. It roared over submerged rocks, creating whitecaps that looked like gnashing teeth in the gloom. Elias stood on the muddy bank, the freezing spray stinging his face. He looked at Leo. The boy was already shivering so hard, his teeth clicked together like dice. He wouldn't survive 5 minutes in that water alone. "I'm going to tie us together," Elias shouted over the noise of the current. He used a length of paracord from his tactical vest, securing it around Leo's waist, and then to his own belt. He looked down at Titan. "Titan," Elias knelt, gripping the dog's wet fur. "You're free. You swim across. Meet us there. Go." He couldn't risk the dog getting tangled in the rope. Titan looked at the water, then at Elias. His ears flattened against his skull. He didn't want to leave his pack, but he understood the command. Titan launched himself into the freezing water. The current seized the dog immediately, spinning him downstream. But Titan fought with ferocious power, his paws churning the water, his head held high like a seal. He disappeared into the darkness. "Okay, Leo. On my back. Hold my neck. Do not let go." Elias waded in. The cold hit him like a sledgehammer, punching the air from his lungs. Within seconds, the water was at his chest. Then, the bottom dropped out. They were swept away. The world became a chaotic tumble of black water and suffocation. Elias kicked wildly, fighting to keep his head and Leo's head above the surface. The current was stronger than he anticipated. It slammed them against a submerged log, the impact cracking against Elias's ribs. "Hold on," Elias gasped, spitting water. But the impact had loosened the paracord. The knot, slick with mud and cold water, slipped. The tension on his waist vanished. "Leo!" Elias screamed, spinning in the water. 10 yards downstream, a small dark shape bobbed in the white water, drifting fast toward a cluster of jagged rocks. Leo was too weak to swim. He was drowning. Elias swam with everything he had, but his heavy boots dragged him down. He wasn't gaining ground. "Leo!" Suddenly, a splash erupted near the boy. Titan hadn't gone to the shore. He had been waiting in the eddy, watching. The Belgian Malinois surged through the current, cutting across the flow with the precision of a torpedo. He reached the boy just as Leo's head dipped below the surface. Titan didn't bark. He bit. He clamped his jaws onto the thick collar of Leo's winter coat, the same coat Elias had given him. With a growl that bubbled underwater, Titan thrashed his head back, pulling Leo's face up for air. Then, the dog began to paddle. He wasn't just swimming, he was towing. Titan drove his legs like pistons, fighting the millions of gallons of water trying to crush them. He angled his body against the current, using the flow to ferry them toward the far bank. Elias watched, heart hammering, as he finally found his footing on a sandbar. He scrambled to the shore, coughing up water, and turned to look. Titan dragged Leo onto the mud. The dog collapsed for a second, heaving breaths, then immediately stood up and began licking the boy's face, whining softly. Leo coughed, vomiting water, and curled into a ball. He was alive. Elias stumbled over to them and fell to his knees, pulling both the boy and the dog into a crushing embrace. "Good boy," he sobbed into Titan's wet fur. "Good boy." They lay there for a minute, exhausted. But they couldn't stay. Hypothermia was now a ticking clock. "We have to move," Elias croaked. He checked the waterproof bag he had strapped to his chest. The phone. It was dry. They hiked up the embankment to the old service road on the county line. A dilapidated gas station sat there, closed for the night, but offering a payphone booth and a vending machine enclosure that was out of the wind. Elias broke the lock on the enclosure and ushered them inside. It was cramped, but the wind was blocked. He stripped Leo of his wet clothes and wrapped him in the dry flannel shirt from his pack. Titan curled around the boy's feet, acting as a living heater. The dog was shivering now too, his energy spent, but his eyes remained open, watching the road. Elias took out the smartphone. 1% battery. Just enough for one action. He didn't call the police. He didn't call the FBI. He knew how slow bureaucracy moved. He logged into the social media app on the phone. Leo's father's account. He selected the video file. Upload. The signal bar hovered at 1 bar. The circle spun. 10%. Is it working? Leo whispered, his teeth chattering. It's trying, Elias said. 50%. Titan suddenly lifted his head. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Headlights appeared on the road. Not a police cruiser this time. A black SUV, unmarked. They had crossed the county line, but Miller wasn't playing by the rules anymore. He had sent his cleaners. 90%. The SUV slowed down, rolling to a stop in front of the gas station. The window rolled down. A suppressor muzzle poked out. Upload complete, the screen flashed. Elias hit post. Then the phone died. Elias looked at the SUV. He looked at Titan. The dog stood up, placing himself squarely between the gunman and the boy. Titan was exhausted, freezing and bruised, but he bared his teeth in a snarl that promised violence. Elias drew his pistol. He had 7 bullets. Stay behind me, Elias said. The door of the SUV opened. But before the gunman could step out, a siren wailed in the distance. Then another. Then 10. Blue and red lights flooded the horizon from the north, the neighboring county. The video had gone live. The internet had seen it. And someone, somewhere, had called the real cavalry. The SUV hesitated. The driver cursed, slammed the door, and peeled away, tires screeching as he fled back toward the river. Elias lowered his gun. He slumped against the vending machine, adrenaline crashing out of his system. Titan stopped growling. He looked at Elias, then trotted over to Leo and licked the boy's cheek. We did it, Elias whispered. The parking lot of the abandoned gas station turned into a sea of flashing blue and red lights. State troopers swarmed the area, rifles raised, shouting commands. Hands in the air! Drop the weapon! Elias slowly placed his pistol on the wet pavement and raised his hands. He didn't look at the officers. He looked at Titan. The Belgian Malinois was standing over Leo, his body a rigid shield. He snarled at the approaching troopers, a deep, guttural warning that said, "Come no closer." Titan didn't see rescuers. He saw more men with guns, more threats to his boy. It's okay, Elias shouted to the officers. He's a canine, don't shoot. He's guarding the victim. A commanding officer stepped forward, recognizing the stance of the dog. He signaled his men to lower their weapons slightly. Elias knelt slowly. Titan, he whispered, his voice cracking with exhaustion. Aus, stand down. It's over. Titan looked at Elias. The fierce amber fire in his eyes softened. He looked at the troopers, then back at Leo, who was clutching the dog's fur with freezing fingers. Titan let out a long exhale, his hackles lowered, and he sat down. The war was over. Paramedics rushed in. They wrapped Leo in thermal blankets, loading him onto a stretcher. When they tried to lift him, Leo panicked, reaching out. Titan, the boy cried. Let the dog go with him, the commanding officer ordered. He's earned it. Titan hopped into the back of the ambulance, curling up on the floor beside the stretcher, refusing to take his eyes off the boy. 3 days later, The storm had broken, leaving the sky a brilliant, piercing blue. Elias sat in a plastic chair in the hospital waiting room. His ribs were taped, and his hands were bandaged from the cold. On the wall-mounted television, the news was playing. Sheriff Miller and 4 deputies were taken into federal custody this morning, following the viral release of a video exposing a multi-state trafficking ring. Elias didn't smile. He just closed his eyes and breathed. "Mr. Thorne?" Elias looked up. A social worker stood there holding a clipboard. She looked tired but kind. "Leo is asking for you, and well, the dog won't let the nurses change the IV bag unless you're there to tell him it's okay." Elias stood up, his joints stiff. He walked down the hallway to room 304. Inside, sunlight streamed across the bed. Leo was sitting up, looking small and fragile against the white pillows, but the color had returned to his cheeks. Titan was asleep at the foot of the bed, his head resting heavily on Leo's legs. One of the dog's ears twitched as Elias entered, but he didn't wake up. He was finally off duty. "Hey, kid," Elias said softly. "Are they gone?" Leo asked. "The bad men?" "Yeah, they're gone for good." Elias pulled a chair close. "You did great, Leo. You were brave." Leo shook his head, his hand burying itself in Titan's thick neck fur. "No, he was brave. He came back for me in the water." Elias looked at the sleeping dog, the scars on his muzzle, the gray hairs beginning to dust his chin. A creature designed for violence who had chosen, again and again, to be a savior. 6 months later, the seasons had turned. The biting frost of Blackwood Forest had given way to the heavy green of summer. On the porch of a rebuilt cabin, Elias sat with a cup of coffee, watching the yard. The silence of the woods was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. "Go long!" a voice shouted. Leo, now taller and filling out his clothes, launched a tennis ball toward the tree line. Titan exploded from the porch like a cannonball. He was faster than ever, his coat shining like copper in the sun. He snatched the ball from the air with a satisfying snap and wheeled around, galloping back to the boy with a joy so pure it made Elias's chest ache. Elias wasn't alone anymore. The silence wasn't empty. He had filed the adoption papers that morning. It wasn't standard procedure for a retired single man to adopt a traumatized child, but the state police captain had pulled a few strings. After all, you don't separate a pack. Leo wrestled the ball from Titan, laughing as the dog playfully nipped at his sleeve. Elias watched them, realizing that he hadn't saved the boy, and he hadn't saved the dog. In the middle of that freezing river, in the darkest part of the night, they had all saved each other. Titan trotted over to the porch, the ball in his mouth. He dropped it at Elias's feet and looked up. His amber eyes were clear, intelligent, and filled with an ancient, quiet love. He wasn't just a dog. He was a promise kept. Some heroes wear badges, some wear capes, but the best ones wear a collar and refuse to leave your side when the world goes dark.